August 13th, 2018. Suburban Colorado. Shanann, 4-year-old Bella, and 3-year-old Celeste vanish without trace. Just hours earlier, Shanann, 15 weeks pregnant, had been dropped off at her home after a trip. She never answered her phone again. She missed a doctor's appointment she had been looking forward to. Her friend grew worried, knocking on the door of a house that stood silent. Inside, the family dog waited patiently, unharmed. Toys were still scattered across the living room. The bedrooms appeared untouched, as though frozen in time. Nothing seemed broken, nothing seemed forced. Yet something felt deeply wrong. Chris Watts, husband, father, and oil field worker, stepped in front of cameras, pleading for the safe return of his wife and daughters. His voice cracked, his eyes darted, his words carefully chosen. But to those listening closely, there was something unsettling about the way he spoke of them, as if they were already gone. Within days, the awful truth surfaced. A chilling discovery was made at the very place where Chris worked. A shallow grave in the dirt. 2 small bodies hidden inside oil tanks. The family that once lived in that quiet suburban home was gone forever, and the man who had begged for their return stood at the center of it all. The Watts family appeared to be everything a suburban dream promised. Chris Watts, quiet and reserved, worked steadily as an oil field operator. His wife, Shanann, outgoing and driven, balanced her career with raising their 2 young daughters. Together, they bought a 5-bedroom home on a quiet cul-de-sac in Frederick, Colorado, a house meant to hold a lifetime of memories. Shanann loved sharing her life. Her social media pages became a window into a family filled with laughter and love. Videos showed Bella, the oldest, shy but sweet, singing bedtime songs to her little sister. Celeste, bold and full of energy, often called Cece, had a contagious grin that could light up the room. And soon, there would be another. Shanann was pregnant with a baby boy she and Chris had already named Nico. She often spoke with excitement about becoming a mother of 3, capturing every milestone with pride. To outsiders, the Watts family had it all. Friends remembered them as caring, attentive parents. Neighbors waved as they watched Chris mow the lawn or Shanann play with the girls in the yard. Birthdays were celebrated with balloons and cake. Christmas mornings recorded with matching pajamas and children's laughter echoing through the halls. Every image reinforced the same story. This was a family who had found happiness. Shanann worked hard, not only for her family, but for herself. Living with lupus, she faced challenges that required strength and resilience. Yet she rarely let it show. Instead, she poured herself into her children, her marriage, and her career. To many, she seemed unstoppable, proud, devoted, and determined to build a good life. Chris, on the other hand, was quieter. He often let Shanann take the spotlight, the enthusiastic narrator of their family's life, while he remained in the background, smiling gently, reserved but present. To her friends, Shanann described him as steady, reliable, a man who once wrote her love notes and whispered promises of forever. She told them he was a rock. But privately, Shanann sometimes confided that something had shifted. Chris no longer seemed as affectionate. The warmth she once felt had cooled. Their conversations grew shorter, their time together more distant. She tried to believe it was stress, long hours at work, the weight of daily life. And still, on the surface, they continued to look like the perfect pair. Photographs from the summer showed the family smiling on vacation, the girls clutching their father's hands, Shanann resting her head on his shoulder. Social media painted a portrait of stability, a life many admired. Even Shanann's posts, filled with exclamation marks and hearts, seemed to confirm that love lived here. Yet in the stillness between those photographs, in the pauses that no camera caught, something else was quietly forming. A distance no one around them could see. This was a home filled with bright colors and children's voices, a place where bedtime stories and lullabies carried through the night. A happy home tucked neatly in suburban Colorado, laughter echoing through sunny hallways. Until suddenly, it was gone. And in the silence that followed, one unanswerable question began to echo. Could someone so normal, a husband, a father, a man trusted by everyone around him, be capable of unspeakable acts? August 13th, 2018 began like any other Monday. But by the afternoon, questions started to rise. Questions that would soon unravel an entire family story. Shanann had flown home from a business trip the night before. Friends knew she was tired, but excited. She was pregnant, scheduled for a doctor's appointment that very morning, an appointment she never missed. Yet when the time came, she didn't show. Calls went unanswered. Texts remained unread. Hours passed. The silence grew heavier. For Shanann's close friend, the worry became unbearable. She drove to the Watts house, hoping for a simple explanation, a phone left on silent, maybe a late nap. But when she knocked, there was no answer. The car sat in the driveway. Inside, through the glass, she could see Shanann's shoes still by the door. It looked as though the family had simply vanished, leaving behind only stillness. The police were quickly called. Officers arrived, knocking, calling out, waiting for response. The family dog, restless, barked from within the house. But there were no signs of Shanann, no laughter of the girls. Just silence. Chris arrived soon after. Calm, composed, yet strangely detached. To the officers, he explained that Shanann had taken the girls to a friend's house. He said they might have left after an argument, that she needed space. His tone was measured, almost rehearsed. But to those who knew Shanann, the story didn't make sense. She never went anywhere without her daughters. She never missed appointments. She never let hours pass without checking her phone. The Shanann they knew was reliable, responsible, and deeply protective of her children. Something wasn't right. As the search began, Chris gave interviews on local news stations. He stood in front of his house, arms folded, looking straight into the camera. He asked for his family to come home. He insisted he wanted nothing more than to see them safe. His words sounded desperate, but his eyes told another story. Some viewers noticed how carefully he phrased every sentence, how he spoke about Shanann and the girls in the past tense, as though a part of him already knew they would not return. Detectives, watching closely, began to sense the same thing. There were details in his timeline that didn't quite align. Neighbors recalled his truck leaving unusually early that morning. A surveillance camera from across the street captured movements in the driveway that didn't match his account. A friend remembered text messages from Shanann the night before. Messages filled with worry about Chris's distance, his coldness, her fears that something was wrong. The more Chris explained, the more the cracks appeared. He spoke about Shanann in ways that seemed detached, as if he were describing a stranger. He repeated phrases that felt rehearsed, his calm demeanor unnatural for a man whose pregnant wife and 2 children had supposedly vanished without explanation. Still, investigators pressed on cautiously. At this stage, there was no proof, only suspicion. And suspicion is fragile. In cases of disappearance, the first hours are critical. Every clue matters. Every inconsistency can open a door. The neighborhood, once peaceful, became a scene of unease. Police cars lined the street. Friends and neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering, watching. Reporters arrived, cameras flashing, asking the same question everyone else was asking. Where were Shanann, Bella, and Celeste? Inside the Watts home, their belongings remained untouched. Shanann's purse was there, her medication, the children's blankets, details that painted a chilling picture. A family had not left willingly. Something had happened here, or to them, and no one could yet explain what. The officers listening to Chris couldn't ignore the contradictions in his story. His effect didn't match his words. His account of Shanann leaving conflicted with evidence in the house. And the surveillance footage from his neighbor's camera would soon raise even more questions. Slowly, what had first seemed like a missing persons case began to feel like something else entirely. A puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. A story being told that didn't quite add up. When someone disappears, do we trust the narrative we're given or question every detail? As the hours stretched into days, Frederick, Colorado, transformed from a quiet suburban town into the center of a mystery that gripped the nation. Police tape, patrol cars, and reporters surrounded the Watts home. Neighbors who once waved to the family from across manicured lawns now whispered in hushed tones, asking the same chilling question. Where were Shanann, Bella, and Celeste? Inside the home, investigators cataloged everything carefully. Shanann's purse sat on the counter. Her medication was untouched. Her wedding ring lay on the bedside table. The children's blankets, the ones they clutched every night, were still folded in their rooms. These were not the signs of a woman who had taken her daughters and left. They were the marks of a life interrupted. Chris, however, continued to insist that Shanann had gone somewhere, perhaps to cool off, perhaps to visit a friend. He shifted explanations as questions grew sharper. To detectives, he said they argued that night. To reporters, he claimed everything seemed fine. To Shanann's friends, he offered vague answers, never the urgency they expected from a panicked husband. On August 14th, the second day of the search, police dogs were brought in. They moved through the house, through the yard, their noses to the ground. Handlers watched carefully. The dogs signaled something had happened there. Yet Chris stood by, his arms folded, repeating calmly that he had no idea where his family had gone. His tone remained even, his face still. That same day, friends of Shanann spoke to detectives. They described her as reliable, devoted, incapable of walking away from her daughters. One friend remembered Shanann's last text message, sent just hours before she vanished. Messages filled with fear that Chris was no longer the man she married, that she didn't recognize him anymore. Those words painted a portrait very different from the one Chris presented to cameras. The community, too, began to see the cracks. Neighbors remembered seeing Chris's truck in the driveway at unusual hours. A surveillance camera caught his vehicle backing in at dawn, something he had never done before. The footage showed him moving back and forth, loading items, though the grainy quality made it difficult to see exactly what. To investigators, this was no longer a missing persons case. It was beginning to look like something far worse. On the third day, August 15th, Chris was called in for questioning. Detectives noted his breathing, shallow, uneven, as they pressed him about inconsistencies in his story. They asked about his marriage. They asked about arguments. They asked about his timeline that morning. Each answer was clipped, careful, practiced. And still, the gaps remained. Detectives confronted him with evidence. Phone records that showed late-night conversations he hadn't mentioned. Messages to another woman. A secret life beginning to surface. Chris shifted in his chair. His composure faltered, if only for a moment. While Chris sat in the interrogation room, outside, his friends and neighbors continued to plead publicly for Shanann's return. Candlelight vigils were organized. Photographs of Shanann and the girls, printed and framed, sat among flowers and candles on makeshift memorials. Strangers whispered prayers. Reporters broadcast live updates as the town held its breath. Yet through it all, Chris remained eerily calm. When speaking to reporters, he crossed his arms, his words flat. I just want them back. I just want them safe. He spoke about his daughters in the past tense, as though the possibility of seeing them again was already gone. Investigators could no longer ignore what they saw. His explanations changed with every conversation. His emotions seemed hollow. His account of the night before did not match the evidence building against him. Friends of Shanann told police about her trip just before she vanished. They said she had been worried. She spoke of her marriage crumbling. She suspected Chris was hiding something. They remembered her exhaustion, her tears, her voice breaking as she confided that she felt him slipping away. And now, she was gone. As the investigation intensified, a portrait of Chris Watts emerged that contradicted the image he had long presented to the world. Not the devoted father, not the loyal husband, but a man who was lying, who was hiding, who was calculating. The house on Saratoga Trail, once filled with laughter, was now a scene of questions, contradictions, and quiet dread. Police walked its hallways with flashlights. Cameras flashed across its exterior, and neighbors gathered under street lamps, uneasy in the darkness. Night draped eerily across the suburban street, porch lights flickering like distant warnings. Every hour that passed without Shanann and the girls returning deepened the suspicion that this was not a disappearance, but something far worse. Did the perfect dad slip up? Could one small detail, one misplaced word, one surveillance clip, one unanswered call be enough to unravel everything? By the third day of the search, detectives had no illusions left. They weren't simply looking for a missing mother and her daughters. They were chasing the truth from a man who seemed to hide more with every breath he took. Chris Watts sat in the interrogation room, wires clipped to his chest, the hum of the polygraph machine filling the silence. The examiner leaned in with calm authority. "This is your chance, Chris. If you had nothing to do with your family's disappearance, this will show it." He nodded, stone-faced, answering each question with a steady no. Did he know where Shanann was? No. Did he hurt her? No. Did he know what happened to his daughters? No. When the test ended, the results left no room for doubt. He had failed. Completely. The mask of calm began to slip. Detectives returned to the room, placing photos of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste in front of him. Their voices sharpened. "Chris, this doesn't look good. This is your family. Tell us what really happened." He shifted, his hands wringing. The air in the room grew heavy. And finally, he asked for his father. In that moment, the confession came, not loud, not detailed, but fractured and devastating. He admitted Shanann was gone. He admitted Bella and Cece were gone too. His words stumbled, his voice cracked, but the meaning was unmistakable. He had destroyed the family he once paraded as perfect. Detectives pressed harder. "Were they, Chris?" He told them. Out in the oil fields of Weld County, miles from the neighborhood cul-de-sac, he had left them. A barren stretch of land dotted with tanks and machinery. A place built for work, not for the memories of children. That night, under the cover of darkness, law enforcement vehicles cut across the Colorado plains. Their headlights pierced the emptiness. The hum of the oil rigs echoed in the distance. And there, by the faint glow of flashlights, they discovered what Chris had done. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave, covered hurriedly with earth. Not far away, investigators turned to the oil tanks. Inside, submerged in the crude, they found Bella and Celeste, just 4 and 3 years old, their small lives hidden in the very place their father had spent his days. It was almost beyond comprehension. A husband who spoke of love, a father who carried his children in photographs, had placed them in steel drums meant for fuel. A betrayal of trust so complete, it seemed impossible to reconcile with the man the world thought they knew. When news of the discovery broke, shock rippled across the nation. Neighbors who had once waved at Shanann pushing a stroller now clutched one another in disbelief. Reporters struggled to convey the horror. Candlelight vigils sprang up across Frederick. Rows of candles flickered beneath family portraits, flowers placed carefully beside toys and stuffed animals, symbols of 2 young girls who would never come home. Shanann's friends spoke through tears, remembering the woman they knew. A mother who worked tirelessly to provide for her daughters. A friend who lifted others up even while battling her own illness. They recalled her excitement about baby Nico, the way she lit up when talking about him, already picking names and dreaming of his future. All of it stolen in a single night. And then there was Shanann's own voice, still preserved in texts, voicemails, videos she had shared online. Her words carried hope, fear, and love in equal measure. In one clip, she spoke proudly of her children, laughing as Bella twirled in the background. In another, she whispered about her pregnancy, glowing with anticipation. Now, those words echoed like ghosts, haunting reminders of what had been lost. Across America, people asked the same questions. How could this happen? Why would he do this? The image of Chris Watts, calm on his porch just days earlier, begging for his family's return, now seemed chilling in its emptiness. His arms crossed, his eyes detached. Was he pleading for them, or was he performing for the cameras? Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandra, spoke softly at the vigils. Their pain was visible, their voices breaking as they remembered their daughter's smile, her determination, her devotion to her girls. They clutched framed photographs, whispering that they would never stop loving her, never stop remembering Bella, Cece, and Nico. Their grief was shared by strangers, thousands of miles away, who felt the weight of a trust broken in the most brutal way. A single piano note echoes here, struck, then fading into silence. The sound of grief, the sound of innocence lost, because in the fields of Weld County, the mystery of disappearance had ended. What remained was the undeniable truth of a crime that tore through a family, through a community, through the fragile fabric of trust itself. And as the vigils burned low, one question lingered for every parent, every spouse, every neighbor watching from afar. How do families rebuild when trust becomes a broken mirror? For Shanann's loved ones, the answer would not come quickly or easily. They were left with fragments, home videos of bedtime songs, birthday mornings, vacations that once seemed ordinary. These pieces became sacred, the only way to hold on to the life that had been taken. For investigators, the work was far from over. The discovery brought answers, but also deeper questions. Questions about motive, questions about planning, questions that would unravel only in court. But for the nation, for the millions who followed every update, this was the moment the case shifted. From a disappearance filled with uncertainty to a tragedy filled with the unbearable truth. In November 2018, just months after Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn baby Nico were found in shallow graves, the public heard what no one was prepared for: Chris Watts's full confession. It came after weeks of lies, after a failed polygraph, after endless contradictions in his story. At first, he claimed Shanann was responsible, that he only reacted in a moment of rage. But detectives, armed with forensic evidence, data records, and their own instinct, knew the truth. And slowly, under their pressure, Chris began to unravel. What followed was not a single dramatic moment, but a chillingly calm recounting. His voice, flat, almost emotionless, carried through the interrogation room. He described how he had ended Shanann's life in their bedroom, while their daughters slept just down the hall. No screaming, no outburst, only silence broken by his admission that he had just snapped. But investigators pressed further, and that's when the most haunting details came out. After Shanann's death, Bella and Celeste woke up. They saw their mother wrapped in a sheet. They saw their father moving her body. And they asked questions, small voices filled with confusion. "What's wrong with Mommy?" Bella whispered. Chris told detectives he reassured them. He lied to his own children, then buckled them into his truck with their mother's body lying on the floor at their feet. He drove them to the oil site, a journey of nearly an hour. In that truck, Bella sang softly to her little sister. Innocent, trusting, believing they would be safe because they were with their dad. Then came a final act. At the site, Chris ended the lives of his daughters one by one. Cece first, Bella last. Bella, who fought back, who begged her father with the words no parent should ever hear. "Daddy, no." Those are her final words. Pause. Silence. The faint sound of a single piano note breaking in. The confession was laid bare in transcripts, displayed on screens for the world to see. Stark white letters on black, unemotional, matter of fact. She wasn't fighting. Bella was the only one who talked. Every line stripped away the illusion of the perfect dad. Every word made the horror undeniable. In court, the truth was presented with precision. Prosecutors outlined Chris's double life, his affair with a coworker, his secret plans for a future without Shanann and the children. Phone records, text messages, deleted searches. Evidence showed he had researched new beginnings, freedom, escape. He had chosen murder as his way out. On November 19th, 2018, Chris Watts stood before a judge and pled guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder. 1 for Shanann, 1 each for Bella and Celeste, 1 for Nico, the unborn child, and an additional count for the unlawful termination of a pregnancy. He accepted a plea deal that spared him the death penalty. Instead, he was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The courtroom that day was heavy with silence. Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandy Razusek, sat in the gallery, holding hands, their grief etched into every expression. Friends wept quietly as photographs of Shanann and the children appeared on screens, smiling, alive, moments captured before their final night. The district attorney described the case as one of the most heartbreaking he had ever encountered. He spoke not only of the crime, but of the sheer betrayal at its core, the destruction of the very people Chris had promised to protect. And then came the victim impact statements. Shanann's mother, voice trembling, spoke directly to Chris. "You took away my daughter, my grandchildren. You were supposed to be their protector. Now I must live with this pain for the rest of my life." Her words filled the room with raw, uncontainable sorrow. In those moments, the courtroom ceased to be a place of law. It became a place of mourning. Every testimony, another fracture in the illusion of Chris Watts as husband and father. But alongside the grief, Shanann's voice lived on. Through old voicemails and social media posts, her presence echoed across the trial. In one video, she beamed with excitement, telling Chris she was pregnant with their son, Nico. She laughed as she revealed the news, brimming with love and hope for their growing family. That video was replayed in the courtroom, a reminder of what was lost, of dreams shattered. The contrast was unbearable. On one side, the confession of a father who ended 4 lives. On the other, the joyful voices of those same lives, preserved in video, frozen in time. As Chris was led away in shackles, whispers filled the courtroom. Some called him a monster. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But one truth remained undeniable. The mask had been ripped away. The perfect family man had been exposed as something else entirely. And yet, even here, amid the horror, the story was not only about Chris. It was about Shanann's love for her children, about Bella's courage, Celeste's joy, Nico's unfulfilled promise. Their legacy was not defined by their deaths, but by the lives they lived. The final question remains, could you imagine the unraveling? What was going through his mind as he carried out those final acts? Was it desperation? Was it calculation? Or was it something colder, the absence of feeling itself? We may never know, but what we do know is that the world will remember the names of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. Their laughter, their light, their lives, far longer than the man who took them away. With Chris Watts' guilty plea, the trial that many expected never came. Instead, sentencing would be the only day Shanann's family faced him in court. On November 19th, 2018, the courthouse filled with reporters, attorneys, and grieving loved ones. The weight of the crime was about to meet the weight of the law. The judge read each charge one by one. The names of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico echoed across the chamber. And each time, Chris answered the same word. Guilty, his voice flat, stripped of emotion. He never once turned to look at Shanann's parents. He never looked at the faces of the friends and family who had come to witness the moment. The silence in the room was suffocating. The only sound was the scratching of pens on notepads, muffled sobs, and the occasional shifting of feet on the cold courtroom floor. The judge, Marcelo Kopkow, did not hold back. He called the crimes the most inhumane and vicious he had ever seen. He reminded Chris that he had not only destroyed lives, but shattered the trust of an entire community. His words cut through the silence like a blade. Then came the sentence. 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus additional years for tampering with the bodies. For Chris Watts, freedom would never again be an option. But for Shanann's family, justice brought little comfort. Frank Razusek, Shanann's father, stood and spoke, his voice shaking as he addressed the court. He described Shanann's light, her love for her children, and the horror of knowing his daughter's final moments were filled with betrayal. "You took away my daughter, my grandchildren," he said through tears. "You were their protector, and you took them out of this world." Sandy, Shanann's mother, followed. She clutched tissues in her hands as she spoke directly to Chris. She asked him a question that will never have an answer. Why? Why would you do this? Her words broke into sobs, her grief filling the entire courtroom. There were no outbursts, no anger from the family, Only sorrow, so deep it seemed to echo long after the session ended. Even prosecutors were visibly shaken, describing the case not just as evidence and charges, but as a tragedy that defied comprehension. Outside, the media captured every second. Headlines spread quickly. Colorado dad sentenced to life for murdering family. The story was printed across newspapers, scrolled across television screens, and filled the front pages of countless websites. Images of Shanann's smiling face and her daughters in playful dresses stood side by side with Chris's expressionless mugshot, a chilling reminder of what had been lost. But beyond the coverage, the human cost remained. The Razuseks returned to North Carolina, carrying their grief with them. Friends surrounded them with support, but nothing could ease the emptiness. They spoke of Shanann often, keeping her memory alive through stories, videos, and the small moments they treasured. They promised that Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico would never be forgotten. In Frederick, Colorado, the community that once embraced the Watts family struggled to move on. The house on Saratoga Trail, once alive with children's laughter, stood silent and still. Toys and flowers piled up on the driveway, left by strangers who came to pay respects. Neighbors avoided the street, their memories of flashing police lights and news vans too heavy to face. For them, the home was no longer a house. It was a grave reminder of innocence lost. Vigils filled the nights. Hundreds gathered, holding candles against the cold. They whispered prayers, sang songs, and released balloons into the dark sky, each one carrying a message of love to Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. The sight was haunting yet beautiful. A community standing together in grief, determined not to let the family's memory fade into silence. Online, Shanann's videos became symbols of resilience and love. Clips of her smiling, speaking proudly about her children, and playfully documenting family life spread across the world. Millions watched, some in mourning, some in disbelief. These ordinary, joyful moments now stood as both a celebration of her spirit and a devastating reminder of what was stolen. Advocates for domestic violence awareness began to speak out, using Shanann's story as a lesson. They urged communities to pay attention to warning signs, to listen to the quiet struggles that can hide behind smiles and carefully crafted appearances. Her story became more than a case. It became a call for change, for vigilance, for compassion. And Chris? He was transferred out of Colorado for his own safety, placed in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. There, he spends every day under strict watch, his life confined to concrete walls and narrow corridors. He will never again walk freely under an open sky. Yet his presence lingers in the form of questions no sentence can erase. Was this driven by selfishness? By desperation? By a need for escape from responsibility? Or was it something even more unsettling, a complete absence of love, a void where humanity should have been? Shanann's family spoke openly. They were grateful for justice, but they would never heal. As Frank said softly after sentencing, justice was served, but it doesn't bring them back. Justice weighed heavy that day, but does it ever heal? The case of Chris Watts shocked the world, not just for the crime itself, but for the way it shattered our assumptions. Here was a man with no violent past, no criminal record, no visible warning signs to outsiders. A man who smiled in family photos, who waved to neighbors, who was seen as steady, reliable, ordinary. And yet, beneath that image, something unimaginable was taking shape. Behind closed doors, perfection can mask darkness. Social media painted Shanann and Chris as the perfect couple. Their house appeared immaculate, their children adored, their future full of hope. To the outside world, it was a dream. But the cracks were there. Quiet arguments, distance in the marriage, financial pressures, and a husband who was drifting away while hiding a new relationship. Shanann's friends later recalled her fears. Text messages revealed her worries about Chris's coldness, his lack of affection, the way he pulled away from family life. She noticed, she reached out for help, she tried to repair what was breaking. And yet, Even she could never have predicted the extent of what was coming. This case forces us to ask difficult questions. How well do we really know the people closest to us? Can love blind us to warning signs? And when trust fractures within a family, how deep can that fracture run before it becomes dangerous? Experts pointed out that Chris's actions fit into a tragic pattern seen in family annihilation cases, rare but devastating. At the core often lies control, resentment, or a desire to erase responsibility rather than face change. These are not excuses. They are reminders that darkness can take root in ways that defy simple explanations. Communities worldwide reflected on the importance of listening to small warnings. The friend who seems anxious but brushes it off, the partner who expresses fear but downplays it, the parent whose smile doesn't match their words. Sometimes, the signs only make sense in hindsight. But hindsight is too late for Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. Mental health professionals, advocates, and survivors of abuse used this tragedy as a wake-up call. They spoke about the need for early intervention, for conversations about control, manipulation, and secrecy. They urged people to check in with loved ones, to take concerns seriously, to understand that behind every perfect photograph there may be struggles we cannot see. For Shanann's family, the reflection was deeply personal. They had trusted Chris, welcomed him into their lives, believed he loved their daughter and grandchildren. That trust was broken in the most violent way possible. The betrayal cut deeper than the crime itself, because it came from within the circle of family, the place where safety should be absolute. The wider community grappled with the same feelings. Neighbors asked themselves, could we have seen this? Could we have done something? The truth is, sometimes the danger is invisible until it's too late. Sometimes the mask is too convincing. And so the question lingers for every viewer, for every family, for every community. Have you ever seen warning signs that only make sense in hindsight? If so, what could they mean today? The tragedy of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico reminds us how trust can be shattered from within the walls of a home. It is a story of betrayal, of lives taken by the very person who promised to protect them. But as haunting as it is, this story is not unique. Families across the world have faced similar horrors. Cases where love turns into fear, where the bonds of family become the setting for unthinkable violence. And each of these stories carries the same chilling question. How could this happen here? Next time, we will step inside another home, another family, another tragedy. The names and faces are different, but the echoes feel disturbingly familiar. Smiles on photographs, laughter in videos, the appearance of normalcy, until it all disappears. You'll see shadows flicker in another suburban home. You'll hear the voices of neighbors who never expected darkness to arrive next door. And you'll walk through the timeline of another family torn apart, not by strangers, but by one of their own. Which story will it be? That is for you to decide. Tell us, what case should we unravel next? Which story do you believe demands to be told? Share your thoughts below, because your voice shapes what comes next. The story of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico will never be forgotten. They were more than headlines, more than a case file. They were a mother who loved without hesitation, little girls who filled their home with laughter, and a child who would never have the chance to see the world. Tonight, we have walked through their lives, their hopes, their joys, and the betrayal that took them away. And while justice has been delivered in a courtroom, it can never return what was lost. For their friends, their family, and for all of us who have come to know them through these memories, the absence will always linger. If this story sent chills down your spine, if it made you think about the faces behind the headlines, about how trust can be broken in the most unthinkable ways, then I ask you, stay with us. Hit like, subscribe for more deep dives into real-life horrors, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next dark chapter.